Hello, how are you? Good.
Hi. That's Mr. Ireland. That's
And we have
I don't know if they signed on. They were saying. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, Sarah.
Good morning, Jim.
Mr. Manager, I owe you an answer. I forgot. I owe you a scheduling answer.
Oh, okay.
I just remembered. We ready? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Sedgwick County Commission staff meeting of Tuesday, April 6th. So we will begin. I'll hand it over to the county manager.
I'll start. We have it's a workshop today, commissioners, and two topics that are pretty heavy duty. Trish Parker is going to start off and talk to us about a consulting service group that came in and did some work in our audit or in our appraiser's office. And it started pre-COVID and kind of got washed away in the COVID situation from last year, so it's time to button that up. And our appraiser is here today, and we have an outside consultant that's coming in on Zoom that will lead that discussion after Trish introduces him. And then the second topic is the pay and compensation workshop that was scheduled for tomorrow has been recalibrated to today, so we can kind of have discussion with commission. It won't be the last compensation discussion. It's kind of our first discussion about how we are progressing in the analysis of that, and to get some direction from the commission on whether we're on the right track or whether you want us to pivot. So we'll start off with the appraiser's discussion, and Trish, if you'd introduce it for us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Trish. Welcome to the meeting.
Thank you. Patricia Parker, Deputy County Counselor. It's my pleasure today to introduce Michael, Michael Ireland. He is the auditor that was assigned by IAAO Consulting Services, and during the time of the transition between Michael Borchard and Mark Clark as the interim county appraiser, we looked at the idea of consulting IAAO Consulting Services to have them take a look at our operations. It had been many years since we had had an audit, and so they provided us Michael Ireland as our auditor. Mr. Ireland has years of experience as a mass appraiser in Illinois. That is an elected office, and I think he was elected for, I think, around 30-some years. So whatever he did, he must have been good at it, and the people there were pleased with what he did as an appraiser. Mr. Ireland has authored textbooks for IAAO, which is the International Association of Assessing Officers, as you know, and he will tell you more about himself when he begins his presentation. So Mr. Ireland spent several days on site with our appraisers. He talked with probably every appraiser on staff at that time, learning about our processes, learning about our functions, and how we perform our state mandated duties. We also interacted with David Harper, who is the director of PVD, Property Valuation Division of the Department of Revenue, and he may join us during this Zoom meeting if he can. He's pretty busy right now with talking to legislators. So anyway, PVD oversees our appraisal offices, all appraisal offices in the state, and so we were fortunate to be able to have their insight and their input. And I think, without further ado, we are ready to proceed.
Okay. So we have, hello, Michael Ireland, Mr. Ireland. So welcome
Thank
to
you.
the meeting.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, before we get started, I want to thank Patricia and Mark Clark for their assist over what's actually been kind of a 2-year period, as Patricia explained. In doing this audit, the process we went through is pretty extensive. She really gave you a pretty good overview of my background, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. We have, let's see, there we go. I have a slide here, and I think you're going to get a copy of this presentation, so if you have more questions about that. But I am the retired assessor here in Bloomington, Illinois, and in fact, I'm still a kind of a part-time employee, helping them, mentoring the person that took over for me, and training some new appraisers that they've hired, because my staff, we all grew old together, and a lot of us retired, so they have some new people in there, and I'll actually be talking about some of those situations for your own organization. Because we want to keep this within a relatively short time frame, we could probably spend all day on this if we wanted to, but we're going to try to highlight issues of the audit, both the good and some of the things that aren't necessarily bad. They could just use some improvement or some tweaking to become more efficient, more effective, provide better tools for the staff that's in place. So I'll just start here with an overview of what the audit process entailed. Sedgwick County staff was sent a questionnaire covering 13 primary broad range topics with a myriad of subtopics under each one of those, and asked to answer those questions about various procedures and policies that they do, whether it's from something that's mandated by the state or mandated by the law. And then we also use some appraisal standards, both promoted and supported by the PVD in a lot of their rules, that's promulgated by the Appraisal Foundation, which is a group in Washington, D.C. that more or less provides guidance to appraisers all over the United States. And so you can see down here the 5th bullet point, we looked at compliance with laws and operational rules, standards of practice, both from the IAAO and the Appraisal Foundation. So some things that came out of the audit itself, and to just give you some background, the property assessment process and appraisal process that the appraiser's office is required to follow is very demanding. It's robust in everything that has to be done, which makes it also stressful. There were, as we finished the audit, as I went through it, we made recommendations along the way under each of the 13 sections. In all, 21 recommendations were provided for improving workflow or work product in some way or another. We took each of these topics and we vetted them against all the statutory mandates, rules, and standards. I was provided access to all of those. Some of that was online, so it was easy to get. And so we would just make sure that everything that was required was in fact being accomplished. So So I want to take you, I'm not going to take you through all 13 because we don't have time, but we've tried to, with the help of Mark and Patricia, tried to pick out some areas that were part of the audit and that we thought you would be interested in, that need some attention and also need to, we'll point out where the staff is really doing an excellent job in what they do, because it takes a lot of commitment and professionalism to attain this. So bullet number 3 here, the review of operations and procedures, does reveal a high level of commitment, knowledge, and expertise that is linked directly to the staff. And these skills that are required to produce a mass appraisal, you have roughly, at the time of the audit, you had roughly 222,000 real property parcels and about 35,000 personal property accounts to deal with. So in order to each year go through a process of reappraising all these properties and appraise them in a way that the appraisals are credible, speaks highly for the staff, their professionalism, and their commitment. The one thing that we want to talk about a little bit here, though, is the skills required to produce a mass appraisal. While fundamentally the appraisal process doesn't change, there is a significant change in the scope of work required. And so people who are in mass appraisal have a requirement for many different types of skills than those that you might find in the private sector appraisers, where they're only required to do one property at a time. And that's quite a different scope of work than to try to appraise 222,000 properties annually and still be accurate and credible in your appraisals. Have any questions about any of that?
Not so far. And we do have a copy of the commission has a copy of your
okay, great.
presentation, so we're all following along. Thank you.
I put together just some helpful terms as we go through this, that these are helpful to understand for context, mostly. There won't be a quiz or anything at the end about this, but, you know, and these definitions come out of various textbook standards, glossaries in the appraisal industry. So what is an appraiser? So an appraiser is essentially a person that values property, but they do it with their skills and expertise that they have in valuation methodologies. And then there's the concept of what's an appraisal. So you can see the definition here is an opinion of value. So that's something that not everyone fully grasps, but in the end, if I tell you as an appraiser that I think your house or your office building or whatever it may be is worth X number of dollars through a hypothetical sale, it's my opinion. That's what it is. But the thing about a skilled and trained appraiser is they have a system that they go through and a process. And it's detailed, it's set up in a way that makes you study the market and extract all of your opinions actually from the market. But ultimately you have to, at some point, usually you get a range of value by doing that, but at some point it's a requirement to, okay, I have to give you, within that range, I need to give you a specific value. Also, this value that we're talking about is a legally defined definition of value. And every state has actually multiple definitions, but in the state of Kansas and in most states, there's part of the statutory requirements provide a statutory definition of what the value is that's being estimated and opined by the appraisers in the county appraiser's office. So that's appraised value. So what's assessed value? So assessed value is a derivative from the appraised value. And it's usually, and in your case, in Kansas, you use what's known as a classification system. And so by classification, we simply mean that different categories of real property, residential, commercial, industrial, personal property, and so on, their assessment is a fraction of the appraised value. So, for example, for commercial and industrial property in Kansas, it's 25%. So if a property was appraised at $100,000, its assessed value would be $25,000. Likewise, residential, it drops down to 11.5%. So again, a $100,000 home would have an assessed value of $11,500. So we're going to talk about some of the broader categories. The first one is management and staffing. And again, within that category, there were 13 specific questions answered. And in addition to numerous sub-questions about staffing, staff levels, which led to answers about everything else. So let's take a look at what staffing looks like at the time of the audit and a history of it. So you can see back in 2005, it looks like staffing levels were at one of their highest peaks at 81 full-time staff members. And then over a period, and those were recessionary years in 2006 through about 2011, it gradually declined to around 72 or 3. And by 2013, you were down pretty much to the level you're at today, which is about 65 full-time staff members. Now, with all of the functions and tasks that are required statutorily and through various directives and as well as standards of practice, it takes a lot of manpower or people power to get this work done, and really the time frame from the time it starts to the time it ends is only about 10 months. And so to get an appraisal on every property within that 10-month period not only takes a lot of labor through staff, but it takes a lot of knowledge and skill as well. This is just a bit of a chart showing the breakdown of staff at the present time, or meaning the time of the audit, and what they do. So a lot of work goes into those first three categories. That's some of the most labor-intensive parts, as you can't have good values unless you have good data. And so that data needs to be collected in the field and verified. Changes to properties are documented through the building permit process. So that requires not only going through all those building permits, but then assigning them to a proper record electronically, making sure that the field review staff has those, they're out in the field, seeing what features changed about the property. In addition, since the value you're appraising is a market-derived value or a market value in general terms, we need sales information. So every transaction that takes place on a property has to be verified, has to be recorded, assigned to the record, and I won't go through all of these. I'm just trying to give you some background and education about what is involved just to even get started. And this is a constant thing that really, if it happens pretty much every day from all year round. That's the only way you can really keep up with it. On the right-hand side of this slide, you'll see that I was notified during the audit process that there was a request for some additional staff in the appraiser's office for 2020, and these were the positions that were being requested. And it's my understanding that one new appraiser was assigned. So one of the things about staffing and its management and its performance. So this is just a little more about, again, kind of really express these, but every appraisal has a date, and in most counties throughout the United States, the date of appraisal for assessment purposes is January 1st. And so we're always, what's the status of the property January 1st? But of course, you don't have enough staff to get to every property on January 1st. And so it's an ongoing process. In addition to that, there's a statutory requirement that every real property shall actually be viewed and inspected once every 6 years, which is referred to as the 17% rule. So 1/6 is, as a percentage of 100, is 17%. So that also means, in addition to all the permit work, all the sales validation, and so on, about 37,000 parcels, just trying to use round numbers to keep it simple, must be viewed. And also, at least 2 sides must be measured and confirmed that what's on the record in the office is what you actually see at the property. This is also tested against a sample set, so, and looking for an error rate of less than 2%. So to get all this work done takes qualified, informed, and experienced staff. And this is part of that qualification and being experienced comes through not just education, but a credentialing process, or in appraisal we call it designations. And there's several appraisers in the office who are designated. This is just a layout of how they are. Probably one of the best known designations, not only in the United States, but in the world, is through the Appraisal Institute based in Chicago. And you have one staff person that holds both the SRA and the MAI designation from that organization. Very similar to those when it comes to mass appraisal is the International Association of Assessing Officers, the IAAO. You have a number of staff members who have designations from there. And those are all significant. They take it's education, experience, case studies, and it takes a while to get these. It's not something you just go to 60 hours of class time and you're done. And likewise, the state of Kansas provides education and training and provides a designation as well. RMA, which stands for Registered Mass Appraisal. And that's more heavily involved with on the education side, but it really creates a stepping stone that much of that education can cross over both to the IAAO and the Appraisal Institute. So you don't have to retake all those courses all over again. So those people who are the RMA, they can move on up and get these national designations as well. One of the things we talked about with the staff members and they had concerns about and rightfully so, because it's a problem kind of everywhere. You can find lots of articles written about the aging of the appraisal profession. If you're seeing me on screen, you see a great example of that. So I've actually been in the profession for over 50 years. So I was 20 years old when I started in the assessor's office. I'm now in my 70s, early 70s. So, as I was leaving office, I knew about when I was going to retire, certainly about 8 years before, and I started working with a succession plan to find someone, get them in and get them trained, because I also knew other staff members were leaving. And it was very difficult to find people, first of all, because it was an elected office, and then second of all, fee appraisers were doing great. They didn't want to leave their businesses. So it's a difficult issue, and I wrote a recommendation of some ways to start thinking about succession plans for those who are on the cusp of retiring in your jurisdiction. I'll come back to that one in a minute. Because when experienced and qualified appraisers retire, they take all of that knowledge with them, all that corporate knowledge that they held and they used for years and years to help complete the appraisal of these 22,000 properties. It walks out the door. And if you don't do some succession planning, in other words, if they can mentor some of the younger people in the office who may be the candidates to replace them, they can mentor them and bring them along in years. By the time they leave, they won't have all of the experience until they get as many years in as they had. But also, what we're learning about the new generations, they're way better with computerization and technology and those kinds of things. So they can bring some new ideas to the table as well. And so finally, to give you a sense of how well the staff is really doing, this is a chart of a performance measurement. And so this is everything the staff does throughout the year. All the staff, every function, every detail is really measured eventually in this simple study of performance here. This is from the PVD, and they allow a ranking of staff performance. In this case, this portion of it accounts for, if you're perfect, 95 points. So the staff in Sedgwick County scored, out of the possible 95, they scored 91 points, which is really, really good. You can see, you may hear property owners saying, why are my taxes so high? You know, but really the office isn't over appraising properties. They're really appraising properties at about 90% of their actual value. And their margin of errors, which was measured through this COD, or coefficient of dispersion, on the residential side, it's 10.5, 10.6%. So that's in terms of industry standards, that's really good. I'll talk about that in more detail. So why didn't they get a 95? Well, you see the highlighted 22.2% down there at the bottom on commercial property. The way the PVD scores this, they would like to see that at 20%. So they just missed that, 20% or below. But what I'll point out to you here is that on the right-hand side, if your coefficient of dispersion is within that confidence interval range there, between 19.9 and 25.1, which the 22.2 is, you can be 95% confident that that's a true measure of dispersion for those properties. And it may just, one property that was a weird sale or something can cause that. So We didn't do any studies to find out exactly, but through the audit, the staff is aware that that's something they probably could investigate a little more and probably go ahead and bring that down into compliance to get to 95. Let's move on to information technology. So what I've done here is just primarily listed the different technology components that are used in the appraiser's office. A primary system used for residential is the Orion systems from Tyler Technologies. This is used for storing the data on residential, real property, and manufactured homes, and its use is mandated by the PVD. For personal property, we have the Amentum system. It's a legacy system. It has some issues. We'll talk about some of that as we go forward. I just want to introduce the different systems. Then there is a proprietary system. Proprietary meaning this is a system that was developed specifically for use in valuing commercial property, but it went through an approval process with PVD. And then we have a couple others that are used to assist in the appraisal. Oblique photography, which is aerial photography at about a, well, I'm not sure what angle these are at. I didn't read all the specs on them, but they allow you kind of an aerial view of the of all the homes in Sedgwick County, all the commercial properties. And one of the things it's good for is this 17% rule. Some of the appraisers can use this oblique imagery to actually capture measurements from the photography. So it's all done to scale. It has intelligence to it. In addition to reduce the amount of printing and paper shuffling, a system known as OnBase is used for document scanning and storage. So most of the technology is working well. It's doing what it's expected to do, but what's happening here is with these different pieces, there has to be some workarounds. And I think this is true in most offices. They have to have some workarounds because there's no one single piece of technology that will do all of this in a single pass. But there are systems like the Orion system have the capability of helping to integrate these so it seems like they're seamless and not individual applications working in, they're working together instead of working against each other. The one exception to that may be the economic unit system. It's a legacy system, as I understood it. It's been around a while. It was programmed outside of the office, and so the county's IT department is only there to kind of get it working and help the office if it has some problems. But if it needs some adjusting and programming or whatever, all of that's done externally. So it's an offsite programmer, and it requires specialized knowledge if it has problems to fix it. And it's used primarily for the appraisal of commercial properties where we need to apply sales comparison approaches and income approaches. And just to give you a sense of how difficult this is and what it's about. So you can see it's for valuing an economic unit is when you have two or more parcels under single ownership, but right now they're individual parcels, meaning they get individual tax bills. And so, but they really make up a single economic unit. So you could think of, as an example, you could think of a Best Buy store where you have the store itself, the improvements, on one parcel and the parking lot on another parcel. But in the marketplace, that would transact as one economic unit. And so that's what this application does, is the appraisers have gone in and identified these parcels and grouped them into economic units to value them. And then they have to reallocate the value and split them back out to assign an allocated value to each of those parcels because they have a separate tax bill. And there was just a forum on the IAAO website, a new appraiser, a new assessor coming into an office asking about this and how different offices dealt with it. And it took a week of answers before the discussion died down. That's somewhat how complicated it is, and it could be driven by different laws and those kinds of things. We could spend kind of almost the rest of the day talking about this, but it is one of the areas that I really think needs addressing because it creates somewhat of a bottleneck at several levels of the process as the year goes on, starting with sales validation. So you could have a sale of a Best Buy store that covers 3 parcels. And so, that's 3. So that has to be combined somewhere to get that sale collective to understand what it actually sold for on a per unit basis or whatever. So I don't want to get too deep into this, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of what the staff has to go through. And that's just the beginning, just the sales validation process. And then it's the value. And then it could come up for appeal. And if whoever is doing the appeal doesn't understand that this is made up of 2 or more parcels, then the appeal appraisal could be messed up, and on it goes. So it's so there is some solution to this, and it needs to. So what's happened is the reason that it wasn't previously part of the Orion system, but I found out during the interviews that Orion has put the technology in so that this legacy system would no longer be needed. But it hasn't been fully vetted or tested by the staff. And so basically the recommendation is that some time should be spent to find out how this system works within the Tyler Orion system, get it off the ground, test it out. There are some jurisdictions who have already done that. So I would suggest visiting them and find out what their issues were. I read an article of one jurisdiction who did it, and they said it worked fine, but it took a lot of training for everybody to understand how to make it work correctly. So things like that. So these are just some things that you may be seeing requests for in the future. So this is a slide that talks about that. And if you go to the full document, I've documented where you can find some of these recommendations and what they are. And this would help relieve some of the problem, but so one of the big buts about this is when it comes to sales validation and splits and combinations of parcels, that doesn't, all of that goes through the Register of Deeds office first. So then there's the interagency cooperation, whether it's through an agreement of some sort or all the offices just to get together and work on it, as this is something we can do to help everyone. And it's part of the Orion system, which may not be a part of any part of the Register of Deeds system. So there's those boundaries internally within the county that need to also be merged together to bring this to fruition and help everyone out at the same time. let's move on. So let's move on to sales ratio studies and what those are. You saw an example of that on that chart I had in the staff discussion, where the PVD was ranking the work of the staff. That was actually the purview of a sales ratio study. Well, of all of the things that are related to technology, qualifying sales, validating sales, and getting them into an electronic file is, it's a relationship there. And the valuation of property and how well the staff is doing is monitored by the PVD, and it's also monitored internally. So what this study is a study of appraisal accuracy. How accurate are the appraisals? And so keep in mind that there's an appraisal done on a property and no one knows what it's sold for. After the appraisal is completed, then it sells in the marketplace, and then that appraisal is used to measure against what it actually sold for, because that's the genesis of what appraisals are about. And so this ratio study provides that. So we take that appraised value, divide it by the sale price, and then we study these things statistically. So we're looking at the level of appraisal, which we like to see around 100%, but there's a range here. I think in Kansas it's 95 to 105. The IAAO standard is a little less stringent about that if you're between 90 and 110%, because the market itself is dynamic. I don't know what your market did during the COVID, but here in Bloomington, we had about a 3% increase in prices. Some of that was due to construction cost increases, but it was a supply and demand thing. People were still buying homes, and people wanted now homes they wanted to go from a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom because they were working from home. And it was really a seller's market. A lot of homes were selling for more than the list price because there was 3 or 4 buyers lined up for every home. And what I've read about the first quarter here locally, it's still going on. So that's what appraisers are dealing with, are these dynamic markets and trying to measure what the impact is on the properties in Sedgwick County, and then appraise those properties accordingly. And then we have this degree of uniformity within the property tax system, so that everybody's treated equally as much as possible when we come to applying those values. And we measure that through again statistically through this coefficient of dispersion, which basically tells us about the margin of error. This is, won't spend much time on this slide. This is just from the IAAO standard on ratio studies. This is a standard that's used worldwide for assessment jurisdictions. The documentation from the PVD alludes to this standard as something they follow. And you can see, again, here they're saying, if you're in the 90 to 110% range, that's acceptable. And then over on that right-hand column, over here, let's see here, oops. I have my pen up. This column right here, it doesn't want to work today. Let me back up to that. But you can see it, COD, they range based upon how much data you have available. The more data that's available, the little easier it is to appraise things. So older and newer are also make a difference. So these are just some of the areas that are covered within the standard. the thing about this and why this is important is it reflects all other processes required to complete an appraisal. So if you don't have good data, if you haven't done a good job of screening your sales, if a sale contains personal property and it hasn't been removed from the sale price, all of those can impact the appraisal and the data that's used to generate the models that are used to apply the appraised value of each property. So this takes a tremendous amount of knowledge and skill to get the data where it needs to be. The IAAO just recently, actually it's not been validated yet, but they have a new standard out on data quality. And so that wasn't available at the time of the audit, but it is out there for review on their website right now. So it's something you can look at and see where there might be some adjustments that the county can make in their sales validation and in their data collection. I know also I reviewed a paper out of Phoenix, I had to remember where that was, out of Phoenix, where they actually did a study of appraised values on old data, and then they went out and recollected all the data in a pilot area and reappraised all those properties, and their COD, their margin of error, dropped about 2 points. So data is important, particularly in the massive appraisal environment. So this ratio study takes us through all the steps, and in a single study with what the level of appraisal is and what the margin of error is, it tells us about all the different functions and tasks that went in to creating those appraisals and preparing the sales also for analysis. So it's very important. There are some issues here that, again, create some bottlenecks. I already mentioned this once, but the Register of Deeds is the one who processes the sales validation questionnaire. So when a property transacts as a sale, there's a questionnaire that's filled out, and that copy goes to the state as the oversight agency, and another copy comes to the county Register of Deeds. And then the assessor or the appraiser's office gets those, a copy of those as well from the Register of Deeds, but there's some bottlenecks there in terms of assigning the parcel identification number and those things. I'm suggesting that there should be some technology revisited there that would help link those sales validation forms directly through the Orion system and attached directly to the record within the appraiser's office for easier retrieval from the CAMA system. So these are just some things that were noted in the report. The other thing would be that I saw the ratio study that was done by the PVD, and then I also was given a ratio study that was done internally. And what I'm suggesting in opportunity number 3 is that those internal ratio studies maybe should be done more often, and it would be helpful if they could be broken down in some different ways. That way it tells you more about if the data is an issue, is the appraiser an issue, is the sales validation process an issue, what's going on with that, rather than just an overall view of here's the one number. But I found it very helpful to be able to look at ratios within neighborhoods, which I'm sure that part's being done. But even within those neighborhoods, you can look at Is there a price-related bias in the appraisal? Is there a bias based on the quality of construction or the condition of the home or those kinds of things? And is our model really reflecting, our valuation model, is it really reflecting those things? So I'm just really pointing out to you the importance of the use of sales ratio studies, some things that should be considered to enhance the way they can be used as a tool. Really, you should run a ratio study before you do your reappraisal each year so you know where you're starting from. There should be periodic ones run during the model building process. There should be one completed at the end of your valuation process to see where everything ended up. You have all your neighborhoods equalized and all your property types equalized. And then finally, I recommend one after the Board of Appeals and the appeal process is completed to see what kind of changes or impact that may have had. So speaking of Board of Appeals and value defense, we're about to the end here. We looked at that because that's an important, that's also an important test on the appraiser's skills, the data collection skills, and so on. So there's really a couple of things about an appeal of your assessment or your appraisal is really what it's about. And these appeals should be based upon facts, facts found in the marketplace. And so a lot of people think when they hear the word tax appeal, they think that what they really are wanting to have happen is they want their tax bill reduced. Well, that's understandable. But the tax bill itself is, in the appeal process, isn't what's at issue. It's the appraised value of the property, which if you get a reduction may reduce your taxes. But if it's only your taxes that you're concerned about, there's other avenues to pursue, and that would be something known as payment under protest. That's not a value issue, that's a direct taxation issue with a taxing body, or if you haven't gotten an exemption that you're entitled to, or something like that. So we're going to focus here on value defense in the appeal process. Now,
Hey, Michael, can you hold on just a second?
I can.
Are we okay? Okay, we had a little alarm going off here in the office,
Oh, okay.
so, but we're good. We're okay?
All right.
Okay to
Good.
proceed, okay. Thank you, Michael.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for letting me interrupt.
So what I want to point out here, because again, it's a technology related thing, it's a staff related thing. And so here's what happens and what initiates the appeal process. First of all, once the assessment role or the appraisal role is completed and they're converted to assessments based on their percentage, what category they're in, everyone who had a change in assessment receives a valuation change notice. That starts the clock. The date of that valuation notice provides a 30-day window for the taxpayer to enter into the appeal process. So it's very time sensitive. This is what your appeals have looked like since 2009. So you kind of peaked out at about 6,300, and then I'm guessing some of this drop in appeals was a result of a drop in values, which came after that recession from 2009 through about 2012, and then we had a little blip up and kind of flattened out for about 3 or 4 years there. But the year right before the audit was completed in 2019, you had almost a 75% increase there in appeals in 1 year. So, but no increase in the time to process them, no increase in the time no increase in the staff to process them. And so it's time sensitive, and all of the appeals, if you looked on this previous slide, all the appeals basically at the informal level have to be completed by May 15th. And one of the things you run into in every office is when it comes time to do anything with a tax office, everybody, just like now, it's coming up on income tax day, and not everyone has done that. And sometimes as many as 50% of the returns are done in that last week. Same thing with appeals. So when you have an extra 2,000 appeals and you get loaded up with 1,000 of those in the last week, that's where that stressful part comes in for the appraiser's office. So the appeal process is dynamic in that it goes through an informal appeal through the appraiser's office. They get a notice. After that notice, if the property owner isn't happy with that decision, they can start another appeal through the Board of Tax Appeals. Likewise, if they're not happy there, they can go to the courts and the district court, and on it goes. And so one of the things that happens in this appeal process is all of the appraisals are done through a mass appraisal methodology. But when we get to the appeal time, we're just dealing with one property at a time. And we have case law that's telling us that the burden of proof, first of all, the burden of proof is on the appraiser's office. There's some case law that's telling us that. And then we have what is the burden of proof? And the legal definition here is preponderance of the evidence. So I just gave you a little idea of what that really means. I had to ask Patricia to help me with that. And I looked it up in a few places and didn't quite get it right. And so this is actually came out of the case law. So the appraiser's office has to provide data and information on their appraisal that's of greater weight and more convincing than any other evidence that's being offered in opposition. All right, that doesn't sound like that really should be too hard. However, remember, the appraisers in the office are held to appraisal standards. So they have to do this in a certain way, using certain data that's available, and where if I, as a taxpayer with no appraisal experience, come in, I can just go and pick the 3 or 5 comps in my neighborhood that I know would support a lower value, and I don't have to follow any specific rules, any specific methodologies. And sometimes, though, that evidence looks the same as evidence that may be provided, but it's not necessarily the same. And so having to follow these standards creates sort of an unlevel playing field. Also, here's where technology could be of some help in automating the appraisal review. I think, and I've actually gone through this process because we're running into the same problem. Once an appeal comes in, we're doing all this specific appraisal work sort of on, we're using the computer, but we're regenerating it in a manual kind of way. And so we reset some of what we did so that all we have to do is enter the parcel number from the appeal, and automatically generates a evidence packet for us, which the appraiser then can review. And if they see some bad information in there, they can override that and rerun it real quickly. But it probably speeded up our reaction time from taking 1 to 2 hours on each appeal to taking somewhere between a half hour and 40 minutes before it can go back out the door and go to the, here we call it the Board of Review, but your Board of Tax Appeals, or off as a notice back to the taxpayer. So I think there's some things there that can be done to use technology a little more efficiently. As I said earlier, some of the obstacles to this are the appraisers' adherence to uniform standards of professional practice. Not that that's a bad thing, and they also have part of this issue with what's in the law, but the appellant doesn't really have that on their plate unless they've hired a private appraiser to perform their evidence. But it's the job of the appraisers in the appraiser's office to promote and maintain a high level of public trust in the appraisal practice. And they do that through credibility of their appraisals, which can be measured in the ratio studies, impartiality. They're not trying, if they did a bad appraisal and now they have a better one, they're not trying to just always come in and say, oh, this is the value, I'm staying with it. They want to be impartial about it and objective. When a property owner comes in and their purpose is to get their value lowered so they can get their taxes lowered, they're not necessarily impartial or objective. And so we have these are the conflicts that get created during the appeal process. So you have to understand that when you go to the Board of Tax Appeals, that the appraisers, it's de novo, which means the hearings don't consider any of the past evidence. So you have a chance to give your best evidence at these hearings. And that's what you should do in being credible and impartial. And you're not trying to support a higher value or a lower value, only trying to support your appraised value, and you believe that is the correct value. So when you get rid of some of those obstacles, if you can, because they're not all in the appraiser's office court to get rid of, but these are some ways that they might approach this and have some success. And so, and the final area we talked a little bit about, or we wanted to present to you during this session, is communication with the taxpayer. And really, everything is done very well here. It's an open book. The appraiser's office is an open book. They have a taxpayer assistance program. They send these notices out. Of course, that's required by law. One of the best things that anyone can do is have a website up with all the property data there. It's available 24/7, 365. So no matter what time of the day or night you need information from the office, you can pretty much get it there. It's the website that's being published out there is well documented, and it's pretty much an open book about all of the information that anyone would get, even if they called the office. So that's a good thing, because again, it helps reduce some of the calls into the office and taking additional staff to answer questions that people really can answer for themselves. There's a speakers bureau. Again, that's a good thing. I have a couple of suggestions about that. One of the things that I wanted to point out here is that we sometimes forget about when we talk about communication and assistance. It's not just property owners and taxpayers, but I spent a lot of times working with taxing authorities, school districts, city councils, county boards, also realtors, attorneys, title companies, planners, and all sorts of public enterprise and commerce are very interested in the information that is contained on the records in the appraiser's office. because the appraiser is both the curator and custodian of all the total property inventory in Sedgwick County. You can't find that anywhere else. You could be a realtor and you can go to MLS. There are multiple listing service, but the only data you have there is something that's either sold or is on the market. But if I want to know about something that isn't, I can go to the website, I can look it up. If not everything I need there is there, I can call into the office. And so there's a lot of stakeholders that are very interested in this communication, and they really appreciate the ability and the openness of that it's a public record. You talk about transparency. I think around the nation, most assessment offices have been public records for years. Even before technology took over, it was not uncommon at all to have 30 people a day walking in the door, going into our files and pulling out records and asking for copies and those kinds of things. And so it's something that not everyone realizes or thinks about. One of the things I recommended here is that I would suggest including a list of topics that the Speakers Bureau can cover. Because I think if people knew, well, I'd be interested, how do exemptions work? How does the appeals system work? How does that work? And if they knew specifically what you would be coming and talking about, rather than just calling up and say, hey, can you come to our service club, or can you come to our sales meeting next week? Tell us what you're seeing as changes in assessment in the next year. You'll get a lot more interest because we had a paper written by some professors out of the University of Chicago a number of years ago, which they titled Taxation Without Explanation, which was a perfect title because the property tax system is complex, and there's many players involved in it, not just the assessor's office. You already have the Register of Deeds, you have the county clerk, you have your county board, you have the school districts, you have the city, and anyone who collects property taxes. They're all involved in it, and they all have some part of it. But a lot of them only deal with their specific part, where the appraiser's office deals with almost every part of that in some way, even if it's just educational. So the other piece would be just to be as proactive as you can with these opportunities. I suggested that monthly reports on where you're at in the cycle to the county board, or at least quarterly reports. I did a monthly report every month for the city council. Even though I was an elected official, they were my board. And so sometimes I would use that as ways of educating them if people were asking them questions. So there's a lot of things that can be done there. You can attend presentations at realtors meetings, appraisers meetings, bar meetings, that's lawyers, those kinds of things. Illinois State University, Illinois Wesleyan are here. There's other universities, Western Illinois, Macomb had one of the professors there had a job fair every year and invited me to talk about being an appraiser, those kinds of things. So just open the door. And that opens dialogue, which improves understanding, which sometimes results in less work instead of more work. So that's, I know I've gone over my timeline, but this is a lot. There's a lot more in the actual report. If you have some questions, I'd be glad to try and answer them.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That you covered a lot. Actually,
Probably covered too much.
no, but I was kind of encouraged that you repeated a number of times the staff and the area's excellent job, very professional. You spoke highly of a lot of areas, so I was a little afraid what this report was going to reveal, and I know we're a couple years since this first started,
Right.
and so there's been some changes already, but it's nice that you pointed out technology assistance. I think Mr. Clark has mentioned that before, and we've all talked about succession planning, and so it's kind of consistent with some of the discussions we've had, but it's nice to have an independent report from you, which points out, again, thank you for the comments about professionalism. That's helpful, and then your recommendations about technology. So
I'm not sure I mentioned it, but since I have this slide up, reminded me, again, this wasn't available at the time of the audit, but again, the IAAO now has a succession plan document out there because they realize it's all over the country. It's not just Sedgwick County that we're running into finding people to fill these roles where because of the aging of appraisers, and it's not just in government, it's even even in private practice. A lot of people are just not choosing to go into this profession. And probably if you surveyed the staff that's in place and asked them, when you were growing up, did you want to be an appraiser in the appraiser's office and do property tax appraisal? No, I don't think any of them would raise their hand. It's kind of something you find out about, and then you find out about how it can be a good profession. It's challenging, which is one of the things that makes it, for me, it made it that I wasn't going to work every day. I was actually doing something I like doing, appraising property. I like going through homes. I like looking at plans and doing analysis.
okay, we have a question or a comment from Commissioner Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And boy, it's quite an honor to have you speak with us this morning. You have a very interesting, qualified history, and it's pretty nice to have you lead this discussion. So thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
I have one question. This might be a legal question, but I understand there's quite a few exempt properties in our county, but we still spend a lot of time evaluating those properties. Is that a legal requirement? I mean, it seems kind of almost pointless to spend a lot of time appraising values that we're never going to have. It doesn't really feed into the system of taxation.
Well, I understand, and that's a very logical question, but as the case may be, Kansas law requires all properties, taxable and exempt, to be appraised on the same cycle with the same tools. And so that is a requirement.
And that is the current law. I'm curious
That's
with
current
his
law.
perspective if there's other states that may do this differently.
Maybe so.
If you like, I can address that just a little bit for you. I mean, so one of the things that some states have implemented with that, and the reason for that is these exempt properties don't pay taxes, they do receive government services, fire protection, police protection, and so on. So they do receive some government services, and in some states, I know Massachusetts did this for sure, they put in place a payment in lieu of taxes to help support those functions. It wasn't nearly as high, but they required the appraisal of those properties, and then they use those as a methodology to figure out those values as a methodology, whether it's just the square footage of the building, maybe not even the value of, we think you should contribute this much to us for police and fire protection, help offset some of those costs. Because if you have a fire in a dorm building or whatever it is, you're going to want the fire department to show up.
Well, thank you for,
So
thank you
that's
for
some of the reason for it. I don't know what it is specifically in Kansas. I know we have, it wasn't in my jurisdiction, but if you're Shocker fans, then you know about Illinois State University. And so that's a campus of about 22,000 students there. And while we, in Illinois, we're not required to appraise exempt property, there is some need to know the size of dormitories and other things about some of these exempt properties for the purpose of providing security and other things. So,
Well, thank you for that answer. I guess I would be interested in maybe keeping that on our things to think about list. Again, if this would create some efficiency, I guess I would like to know how many properties in Sedgwick County are exempt from taxation that might save some effort if we were to change state law on that. And I certainly understand the safety and security and that, assessments by the fire department and other things. And we do have a pilot in lieu of taxes. I call it pilot. We do that with, I guess, a very small number of properties in Sedgwick County, but that is a good answer. Thank you for that. I have a couple of other questions. Senate Bill 13 just passed, and in that bill, it requires that we would essentially disregard normal maintenance as a basis for changing tax value, or I should say, tax value of the property. So I'm curious about how that's going to be absorbed by our current policies and procedures. And secondly, I assume other states may have this as well. I'm a little bit concerned because we've always talked about fair market value. In my opinion of fair market value is if you do landscaping, for example, or if you enhance the property in some way by doing, new siding or new windows or whatever it would be, that you change the fair market value of that property. So how is it we're going to absorb this new requirement to disregard normal maintenance? That's for anybody, I guess. I think it's a concern.
Commissioner Howell, Mark Clark, County Appraiser. We've been looking at this issue, and we really don't believe that it's going to have that big of an impact. We aren't going out there and dinging, and I believe, if I remember correctly, you had brought up the issue of a driveway and et cetera, et cetera. As much as, we want our data to be accurate, we just don't have the personnel to pick up every little nick and cranny. We don't. And so we just don't see that being a major issue.
Okay, that's a good answer.
Now, I'm not going to say that people won't bring that issue up in an appeal, but we're going to look at it as we do in any appeal, but we just don't see that being a major issue.
Thank you. On the presentation on our page 7, which is probably slide 14, I'm guessing, it says see recommendations 1, 6, and 7, and I do see recommendation 1, but I don't see recommendation 6 and 7 shown on the slideshow here. Are they something that we should be talking about today? Are they is it something or am I missing it?
yeah, those are references. So if you have the whole document, you can go back and look at those. The reason that I listed 3 of them is they're tied together, but I gave you 1 there so you have a sense of what we're talking about.
Okay. All right. Then I'll try to wrap up my comments here. I do have a kind of old opinion here that I think before I get to my question here, I understand the process. If someone goes through the informal hearing and they're not happy, they're not satisfied with the conclusion of their informal hearing, the next step is they would make an appeal through BOTA. And I guess the Board of Tax Appeals sends someone to Sedgwick County for a short time to try to knock out some of those formal hearings locally, but it's still a person from Topeka. Am I saying that correctly? And I guess it also has an option to go to Topeka and make that appeal in front of them in Topeka. So please explain that process.
Small claims is the next process for a residential property owner. And that is somebody that's contracted through BOTA. Usually lately they've been having trouble and they may use a staff attorney or a member of their staff. Nonetheless, it will either be held at the Sedgwick County Extension Center, it may be over at the Andover Library, but that is also considered an informal meeting, an informal hearing. Only a formal hearing is going to be with the 3 members of the board. That is the official regular division of BOTA.
Okay, I guess tying into that, the chart that you presented to us that shows the number of informal appeals, this is what's happening in our Sedgwick County office, I assume.
That is correct.
Do we have a percentage of how many of those would result in some type of an adjustment on that assessment or that valuation?
I can get that for you.
That'd be good to know that, and I guess I'd also like to know if there's a way to get this from the state or whoever would have the data, how many of those are further adjustments are made at the next step in this process.
We can get that as well.
Very good. And then my guess, and that ties into my old opinion, my old thought here. I understand that under Kansas statutes, we still have the option for a hearing officer panel, that we could make appointments to that local panel. We could have local people that would sit as another step or maybe a replacement step in this appeals process. I assume this is a formal hearing that would be done here locally, but through people that we would appoint.
That is true.
To represent. So I guess with that, I guess I ask my colleagues and other folks in the room here, and especially our expert, what's our experience with hearing officer panels? Do other states use them? It's not on your list of recommendations here, but right off the top of my head, I think there's some value in this. There's also maybe 1 or 2 concerns I have about this, but I do think it's a different way of doing this. One thing I do like about it is I think that it gets to the formal hearing and it uses people who are connected to this community. In other words, they live here. They live among us. They're trained to do this. They're following state laws. They understand the processes and procedures that brings this valuation to a conclusion. They know what they're doing, so I trust their expertise. And I think that the fact that this is done in a local setting is very appealing to me. But I guess I'd like to know from his perspective, what's his experience with hearing officer panels done at the local level?
Yeah, I'd be glad to address that. In Illinois, our process here is you can go to the local assessor's office or the county office, and usually we do all of our initial work at a municipal/township level, and then those are sent on to the county, and once those notices go out, that starts the formal appeal process. But that board is a local board appointed by the county board of three people. They do have to pass a qualifying exam. And they then become sort of the finder of facts at the time of appeal. So once that formal complaint has been submitted, that's where we generate this appeal packet. And that's reviewed by the appraiser. They either sign off on it or they go back in and tweak a couple of the comp searches or something to make it a little more defensible. And then that evidence is sent over. The board also takes the appellants or the taxpayers' data and information, and they go through it. Sometimes they have appraisals that were done for loan purposes, but at that point there's no testimony given. They make a decision. They send out a notice to the property owner what their decision is. They give them 10 days, if they're not happy with that, to come back for a hearing before them. At which time we also show up, and depending on mostly for residential properties, just the appraiser goes. And some of the higher end, more expensive, more tax dollars at risk, attorneys are present representing as interveners, school boards, cities, those kinds of things. And we have a little more detail of giving testimony and then the board decides whether they want to stand on their original decision, whether they want to make an adjustment, or go completely outside of all the data. From that point, then that decision, if again the taxpayer is not happy, they can go to the state. But the thing is if they have an appeal before the state appeal board, that hearing officer, they assign a hearing officer. That hearing officer comes to our county. You don't have to go anywhere as the taxpayer. And at that point, the only level of appeal left, if you don't get what you're looking for from the state, you can, through administrative review, you can go to the circuit court.
Thank you for
Unless
that.
you can prove fraud or something like that.
Thank you for those answers. I guess I just want to state my interest in this. I think it'd be a good change for Sedgwick County, and I would like to see us do that. Again, I think it brings, if you will, some formality to this, but again, the commissioners then have some ability to help determine some of the people who are making these decisions. And again, I think I'm interested in I guess, making sure that we're happy with the way that this thing is working. And again, to the extent we have some ability to put the right people on this board, I would like to have that opportunity. I think that's a good thing. Again, my interest is fair and equitable treatment. I love the words impartiality and objectiveness. In fact, the term de novo that you put in your slide this morning, it caused me to think of one of the common questions we get this time of year when people get their valuation notices and they're very upset. Some of them, they'll contact the county commissioners, and of course my answer is, we don't drive this process. And a lot of them, when they make that phone call, they're concerned because their valuation went up sometimes, 12 or 15, even 20%. And I think that if I understand correctly, that you're not really looking back at the previous year's value. You're looking at this fresh every year. You're looking at this and saying, what's the value this year without regard to what happened last year?
Correct.
And I think so sometimes it might be a big change, but there's not like there's someone picking on that property owner saying, we're going to give you a 20% change, we're going to give you a 10% change.
Correct.
This is an independent valuation each and every year. Even though you probably put hands on the property, so to speak, every 6 years, every year when you make an adjustment to that property, it's done through mass appraisal tools. And so it's a fresh look each and every year without regard to what happened the previous year. Is that a fair way to say that?
That's a nice way to say it.
Okay. And I just want to say, I know that property taxes are very, very despised by everyone because I think they feel like they're subjective. And I do appreciate the presentation today because I think what we're describing here as a way to turn what appears to be subjective and make it as objective as possible and defensible, that we are doing this in a way that makes sense. And again, we're not picking on taxpayers, we're simply trying to determine their property's value because this is a system of fair and equitable taxation that people long before us have developed. And so I may not like property taxes, but is it fair and equitable? I think we made a pretty good defense for that today. Thank you for your comments today, sir. Appreciate your appearance today before us. I really am impressed with you. You're a good man. Thank you.
Commissioner Howell, I would like to speak to your comment on exempt properties and should they be valued. I understand your position. I appreciate that. I can tell you that whenever we get an exemption application, the Board of Tax Appeals expects a current value on that property. And so when we have people interested in properties, take for example, the city of Wichita has lots of exempt property. People will call me or they'll call the office and ask, well, I'm interested in this property. Is this value current? They're talking to their lender or whoever. We get pulled into the conversation. So those values do mean something. And it's my understanding that from the values that appear on that BOTA application, the legislature gets an annual report. So I'm just putting that out there as additional information. Thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions or comments. Michael, thanks again for the presentation and the hard work, and we will move forward in this area. So thanks again, Mark, and
Well, thank you. You all have a good day.
thank you. And Tricia, thanks for your help on all this as well. Appreciate it. Okay, we want to take a 10-minute break. Let's come back at 10:40, and we will go on with the next one. Okay, we back live? Okay, we're on.
All right.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the quick recess, and then we're back. So, Tom, back to
Thanks,
you.
Chairman and Commission. Sheena's here today, and this is somewhat similar to the analysis of the Appraiser's Office. This is a project that we started before COVID. That kind of languished a bit while we were operationally managing COVID last spring and summer, and as we're in a budget season right now, it's appropriate to bring it back. And Sheena will talk to you about some reclassification exercises, and we'll talk about the compensation strategy for the organization moving forward. This is a workshop kind of setting. We will not ask for a vote today. We just need some guidance from you if you think we're hitting the target on what it is we're proposing today, or if you want us to pivot a little bit. It will not be our last discussion on compensation. We will continue to have these discussions throughout the budgeting process this year. So with that, I know Sheena has a presentation, and Misty is here also from Wichita State to assist with this. So Sheena, if you take us through the presentation, please.
Sure.
Good morning, Sheena. Welcome.
Good morning. Again, I'm Sheena Schmetz, Chief Human Resources Officer. Today we're going to discuss our employee compensation and how it relates to our 2022 budget. And I want to quickly introduce some of the team that has worked on this project. From WSU here with us today is Misty Bruckner, and also Katie Givens, who is not here with us today but has played a tremendous part in this project. From Human Resources, we have Bethany Corral, and Amy Murray is watching online with us today. And then recently, Anna Meyerhoff-Cole has joined our team. So we've had several people who have played major roles on this project, and it has been ongoing, as Tom said. We started it back in 2019, the review with WSU, and then everything had to be put on pause while we addressed COVID. But we have picked things up, and we would like to walk you through that process today.
Okay, looking forward to it. And Misty, welcome to the meeting.
So just a real quick overview of what we will be doing today. We'll review the compensation history. We'll also discuss an employee survey that was sent out to all employees on behalf of Human Resources through IMA. And that was something that was requested in the February workshop, was to get the voice of the employee. We'll look at the total compensation overview and then get into really the bulk of everything is the salary and wages, and then talk about our next steps. So briefly, the history of compensation, looking back to 2012, there was no pay adjustment for employees. From 2013 through 2015, there was a 2.5% performance-based pool. Now, that does not mean that the employees received 2.5%. It just means that there was a pool of money of 2.5%, and that was divided up amongst the employees based on their evaluation or their performance scores. In 2016, there was a 1.75% performance-based pool, and in 2017, that was increased to 2.5%. From 2018 through 2019, there was a 2.5% flat pay adjustment. So that would be the case where all employees received the 2.5%. In 2019, there was the additional 1.5% bonus pool. And in 2020, the 2.25% flat pay adjustment. And of course, in 2021, employees received no pay adjustment. Moving on, I do have a handout that you received that goes over specifically what the voice of Sedgwick County employees relay to us. This was a survey, again, provided to all employees from March 4th through March 12th. And approximately 1/3 of our employees attempted to fully respond or partially respond to the survey. We asked the employees, what is the most important thing to you? What is the most important to you based on what you value? And overwhelmingly, 64% of the respondents said that compensation is one of the most important things to them. Followed up by our health insurance and additional payer recognition at 43%. So clearly we can see that benefits rank very high with employees. We ask employees as of today, how satisfied are you with your benefits package, compensation, learning development, physical work environment, so on and so forth. And again, jumping out very alarmingly, that well over half of our employees are dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with their compensation, which is ultimately why we are here today and what we're discussing. I do want to point out that on our benefits package, meaning our health, dental, things of that nature, majority of employees are satisfied or very satisfied with those. So that is a good indicator for us. We also asked the question, what is the main reason you came to work for the county? We thought that was really unique because we wanted to know what brought employees to our doorstep. And overwhelmingly, 43% said the type of work or projects I'm doing. We do very unique work at the county, and I think that is really highlighted by this slide that shows you people want to do this type of work that we provide here. And then we asked the question, what would be your main reason for leaving? And again, 59% of employees state that it would be because of their compensation. The next biggest factor in there at 11% say my manager. And I do want to point out that we are implementing supervisory training. We're on our second cohort of that. So we are doing things to implement things for our supervisors and managers to help them build their skill set up. Real briefly, just a total compensation overview. When we talk about total compensation, we are talking about many things, not just wages. We talk about the wage, but there's also your benefits, including health, dental, and vision, retirement. I know that's been a topic many times that have come up. Our wellness, FSA, and HSA plans. Our life insurances, including life, accidental death, and dismemberment. Supplemental insurance that we offer employees, and of course our sick and vacation leave. This slide might look a little familiar to you. We presented this back in 2019 when we had the Gallagher study, and that was a highlight also into what we offer in our benefits package. And based on that study in 2019, it indicated that the county is slightly behind market in terms of benefit and pay practices provided to the employees. The most notable difference are our adjustments to the pay schedules, floating days, paid leave for part-time employees, the carryover of paid leave. I might clarify, we do allow carryover, but we are slightly behind in the amount of carryover that we allow. Gym memberships, the ability to work from home or telecommute, and tuition reimbursement. However, we tend to be leading the market in our employee contribution to medical and dental insurance. And I've just highlighted here on this next slide some things that we continue to do. And one of those is gym memberships. We're in the final stages of rolling out information to employees on gym memberships, so you will be seeing that very soon. And then due to COVID, we now have the ability to work from home or telecommute, whereas that was not a real factor in the way that we performed business back in 2019. And again, in 2020, we kept all of our rates, for 2021, we kept all of our benefit rates the same. So again, we continue to lead in our employee contributions in both medical and dental insurance. So just a roadmap of things that we have done so far. We have completed the WSU market analysis, reviewing over 750 unique job descriptions and looking at salary comparisons. Misty will go into detail specifically about the market surveys, so I will hold off on those details. The next step that we have just finished, and you might recall we were talking to you about that in February, and we have completed this step, is that we've evaluated over 790 unique job descriptions for our internal job matrix. And what this is a tool that we developed with WSU, and it looked at each individual job description, and we looked at things such as autonomy, the work environment, the skill set needed to perform the job, budget impacts, things of that nature that we were able to apply to all positions within each grade. And we're currently in the process of reviewing all those job classifications for the correct placement on the grade scale. And we will be making those recommendations to the BOCC for your approval. So again, talking about the internal position matrix, these are the factors that all positions were reviewed on: the autonomy, the complexity of the position or technical skills needed to perform the job, the impact of decisions, customer service, and the working conditions. In addition, supervisors were also graded on their leadership, the impact of decisions, and their budget scope and authority. Department heads and above were given one additional section, and that was long-range strategic planning. So this is an example of what we did with all of those scores, and this is, again, just one example of the many grades, but we looked at grade 118, and you can see that we have a standard means or a mean score of all of those positions. And we recognize that we have outliers on both the standard deviation above and below on that grade. And we really took a strong look at those outliers, recognizing that either a skill set was maybe more enhanced for those positions, maybe their decisions had more impact on citizens. And we took a look at those to really identify, should they be in a grade 118 or should they be outside of a grade 118? And we compared each of those with all of the succeeding grades, and that helped us make our recommendations. I want to refer to our current policy that we have on reclassifications. I spoke to you a little bit about this before. When we do make these recommendations, we are making these grade recommendations based on individual positions. So it is based on an employee's current salary, and if they move up a grade, they can either go up to the minimum or 4%, whichever is more, based on midpoint. If their salary is higher than midpoint, it's a 2% increase. And so when we talk about these grade reclassifications, they're not the same across the board. They are unique to each position. This is one example. Again, this is not tied to any one employee, but just an example of the process that we went through. If an employee is at a current grade 120 and had an annual salary of $31,533, our market information shows that they are 10.41% behind market. According to our internal matrix, we are recommending a grade change of 121. This will reflect a $1,262 increase for that specific employee, which happens to equate to 4%, bringing that annual salary to $32,815. With that change in grade, it then brings them to 4.8% behind market. So again, we've gone through that with each of the positions. And so everyone looks just slightly different. So it's not all across the board the same. And you can see on here, I put grade 120 and 121, and you can see that that position is going to reflect a 4% increase as opposed to just moving to the minimum of grade 121 because the 4% is more. What we are recommending today is a reclassification of 858 positions. The cost of that reclassification is roughly $1.5 million. And again, these reclasses range all the way from 2% to 15.78%. And again, we know that there's a few outliers that we're going to review. We will review all of these if we have the go-ahead or the further direction from the BOCC with all the departments and divisions to get their input and feedback. We recognize that we looked at everything on a job description, and we might need further clarification from departments on job descriptions. We also anticipate more reclassifications based on the job family report that we are anticipating from WSU. We hope to have that sometime this week. And you might recall we are asking to hold back roughly $1 million to look at those reclasses based on that information that is coming forward. We are also recommending a 2% general pay adjustment for the organization. The cost of the general pay adjustment is roughly $3,283,867, and we're just going to estimate that at 3.3. I've been asked by finance to kind of round up on that number. But for our pay pool for 2022, we have a 4% pay pool, and that equates to $6.4 million. If you subtract out the $1.5 million for the reclasses we're asking for today, the $1 million for the job family reclasses that we anticipate in the very near future, and the 2% GPA, that brings us to a grand total of $5.8 million, which is within the allocation for the 2022 budget. Again, just to go over our framework that we have been working through, we have worked through the position matrix. This is the first step into realign all the positions onto the correct grade. The next step that we will have targeted funds will be to look at the market analysis with the information that we have. And with that targeted funds, we would look at areas such as future growth, the hard to fill, and the high turnover positions, and really address where that money needs to go. But before we talk about that, I'm going to bring Misty up, and she's going to talk a little bit about the market analysis side. So Misty?
Good morning, Commissioners. Misty Bruckner from Public Policy and Management Center. We've talked about this before, but just a reminder on how the market analysis was done. We first started with ONET, which is a free source of data information where people go in and provide the information on their compensation. And when we looked at that information, we used that to benchmark all of the job descriptions to make sure that we were comparing like job descriptions. We also used that to look at what educational requirements these positions would have. There's been changes. Can be look at licensing, can be look at graduation levels, could be look at certification. So making sure that the right education levels are for each of these job descriptions. And we also looked, of course, at wages, how that comparison was. And then our final one, for future planning, is really the growth in a job market. So do we think that these are going to be additional positions that are going to be needed in this area, or do we think that there will be a decline in the demand for these positions in the future? So examples might be we see growth in healthcare or mental health, that there's going to be more demand even in those areas where other positions might be declining. So that was the first source that we looked at for comparison to make sure that we had the right information. The second effort was actually information that we purchased through Comp Analysis, and this is information that they go out and purchase that data for what actual wages are for these positions. And we use that to compare within the Wichita market, but we also looked at 3 other communities to do that work. So we looked at Little Rock, we looked at Greensboro, and we looked at Des Moines. And we did adjust for cost of living in those communities compared to our communities so that it was accurate information. We then put on the filter for the government sector. So some jobs are unique to government, but there's some that, of course, go into the private sector or nonprofit sector as well. The last part that we did were positions that are more hybrid positions. So while a budget analyst might be a budget analyst for Sedgwick County, might be for City of Wichita, might be for the City of Des Moines, there are positions within Sedgwick County that have been put together that are unique. And so this tool allows us to say partially admin assistant, partially file clerk type of position, and to be able to make those adjustments. So again, we are making comparisons as accurate as we can with that information. So then we looked at that information based on different percentiles, with 50th percentile being what we consider the market analysis. That is the midpoint that we are trying to look at. And what we have found in looking at the positions for Sedgwick County, using the 50th percentile, positions that are 20% or below that market value. You have about 25% of your positions are 20% or below of market value. You have about 11% that would be considered on the cusp there. They're somewhere between 15 to 20%. You have about half, a little more than half, that are falling between 14% below to 9% above. And then you have about 12% of those positions that were 10% or above of market value. Okay. So looking at all those 750 positions, you got about half that are within the target area, about 25% that are significantly below at 20% or greater, and you have about 11% that are on the cusp of going that direction, and 12% that would be considered above market value. And then I'll turn it back over to Sheena for the overall market information.
So overall, we are looking at those 750 positions, indicating that we're roughly between 8 and 9% behind market. That is a little bit different than what we heard in the Gallagher study, and that was because only 50 positions were reviewed during that study. So that's where the bigger look came from. And we have a wider range that we looked at with WSU, but it was not inclusive of every single position in the county, but a better look at it. We're asking with those recommended grade changes that will bring us closer between 7 and 8% behind market. The next piece is a timeline of what we would project in the future. Of course, with your guidance in 2022, again, we ask for that grade reclassification and a general pay adjustment. In 2023, we'd like to see target adjustments based on that market information, also a general pay adjustment. This would also be the year we would move our pay scale so we could entice new employees to the organization. And we would also ask to review our pay plan. Is this exactly what we would like to keep in place? And we would begin looking at that. 2024, we would again anticipate a general pay adjustment and that pay scale movement. And in 2025, we would again do another market study because we want to keep that information accurate every 5 years. Again, asking for another general pay adjustment, a pay scale movement, and possibly a review for a merit pool. In 2025 through 2030, we would implement that new market information, and again, asking for a general pay adjustment and a pay scale movement. So one thing that is consistent, you can see, is we are always anticipating some sort of general pay adjustment and keeping that pay scale moving so that way we don't get stagnant in the future. Our next steps in this process, again, we will review the job families in the final report by WSU. Again, we anticipate those very soon. We'll review all of these recommendations with departments and divisions. We want to get their feedback, but also clarification because we have many things earmarked that we need clarification from the departments. We had submit all those grade reclassifications to the BOCC for approval and develop a strategy to address positions behind the market analysis. And with that, that concludes our presentation, and we are open for questions or discussion.
Okay, thank you, Sheena. I know there's a lot of work there done. Thank you, WSU, for being available and assisting as well, and all your staff for this hard work. So the reclassification next step is what you're asking for guidance on and authority for.
So if you think we are headed in the right direction with the reclassifications that we've identified based on our processes, we would like to next review those with the departments.
Okay. Well, and for Commissioner Lopez's, her newness, we did have a pretty good, robust discussion about this last go-round when we recognized it's not any surprise to the rest of us that we are below market in a number of areas, not every area, but a number of them. And we were going to make an attempt to help justify that or help substantiate, close that gap a little bit. And then COVID hit and everything was frozen. So that's just a little more background I think we're making positive steps, but I'm open for any questions or comments from the commissioners. Commissioner Dennis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sheena, thank you very much for the.
Oh, yeah. It's on. Okay.
Thank you very much for the briefing. I appreciate it. Just a couple questions. On your slide 8, you said what would be your main reason for leaving. Were those from exit interviews, or are those just general opinions of people?
That was not from a formal exit interview. That was part of the survey that IMA provided to us, and they provided the questions for us.
Okay, so how many people actually left after that?
I don't know. They were anonymous. The survey was anonymous, so we wouldn't be able to go back and capture any of that.
Well, it just worries me a little bit on whether that's accurate or not, because if we don't know that they're leaving, if they just have an opinion, yeah, I might leave because of pay. It really brings me to the next, on your next slide, one of the things when you're looking at total compensation overview, I think stability of employment is important. I think that should be a main bullet. If you recall where we were at back in June with 21% or so of our people in Sedgwick County that were unemployed, all of our employees in Sedgwick County that worked for the county were still employed, still had health insurance and so forth. So I think that's an important factor that needs to be considered. And we've still got people that can't get unemployment compensation from the Department of Labor. So all of ours don't need it because they still have a job. So I think that's kind of a significant benefit for working for Sedgwick County. Not included in this briefing, but when you looked at and we have additional information that you provided us earlier, so I'm going to refer to that, okay? When we look at slide number 17, 18, those areas where you were looking at all these job titles that were reclassified, one of the I guess I've got a little bit of concern because we got 203 job titles that are actually above market value right now. But as we go through and we're looking at providing over $6 million to help, it's going to go across to all of those positions, not just the ones that we need to reclassify. We've got people that are as much as 31% above market value. And so I don't know how we balance that, because every time we give a pay raise on top of that, it makes it even more out of balance. We need to concentrate on these 555 jobs that are below market value, and I'm not worried at all about the ones that are above market value. I don't know how to balance that, so I need some kind of guidance as we look at the future.
Okay.
So that's slide 17 and 18 that we were talking about. Let's see. Then when you get up to slide number 25, you're talking about the overall market information, and you looked at the 750 job classifications, and we're 8.68% behind the market value. But if we give $6 million pay raise, we only gain 1.3%. And that's kind of concern to me is how do we balance this? How do we not go into compression on pays? So I didn't have any solutions to any of those questions. That's what I'm looking at you for, to help me as we move forward. I understand that there's a concern about where we're at, because from the information we had yesterday, we got 555 positions that are below, and some of them as much as 31% below. 73 different job descriptions are 31% below the market. And how do we concentrate on those that are most severe, and we don't just kind of put a broad brush over everything?
And that's why we want to take a deeper look into those outliers and really address them. We want to make sure that what information we receive is truly comparable. And that's why we need some help from the departments to make sure that they're looking at the market information and the job description and telling us, yes, those match, or if they don't, then we need to go out and seek something that's more comparable to the job that's actually being performed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Misty and Sheena, I appreciate what you did. I don't have a great solution for you at this point in time. I guess I'm concerned to spend $6 million and we only improve 1%, and we're still behind. So any advice you can give us as we move forward in this budget process would be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Lopez.
Thank you so much. I know I've said this before, but I'll just reiterate. Because I am so new, I've been able to tour with all of the departments just very recently, and pay is, I mean, it appears that it's exactly what this is showing is it's the biggest problem, and it's what I heard just repeatedly. And so, to me, it seems like if we're losing so many people and having to retrain, that it ends up costing us more than just paying better going forward. So I love everything that I'm seeing here. I do have a couple of questions. If we're saying 11% of people would leave because of their managers, are we doing any kind of survey from departments about their managers? I know that we used to do that, you know, where I came from, and the managers didn't get to see who said what, but you know, HR could see all that and then do a review with the manager. Is there anything that we're doing similar to that?
No, we don't do anything like that. We are requesting some tools to help us do better surveys and to get better analytics so that we can ask those questions and be able to do something about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then about what percentage of people that leave are actually doing the exit interviews?
It's a very small number. I think the last report I looked at, I haven't looked at the most recent one, in that month, I think we might have had less than half a dozen. So it's very small.
Okay. On these ones that look like they are pretty high above market value, are those capped, or are they still able to continue to go up? Or is there a way, if they're 31% over market value, can we cap that so we're not letting that continue?
I would have to specifically look at what those positions are and look where they're at on their grade. So I could not definitively answer that if they're capped.
And then what would it take to move the target adjustments based on market info that's on 2023? What would that take to move that to 2022?
It would require more funds.
I think we talked about this yesterday a little bit. It was about $1 million, is that right?
We have requested to set aside $1 million for what we are looking at in the job families. So we're hoping to condense some of those classifications, and we anticipate more reclassifications from that. But you know, if we have more money, we can do a lot more things, but we recognize that we need to stay within what is forecasted right now, unless we are given direction from the board.
I mean, it'd be interesting to see how much more that would add on to this. I mean, if we have the money in the general fund, I know we can't spend it down all the way, but if we're able to get people, you know, reasonable pay, I know as a mom, pay is what would completely determine if I would stay at a position or not. Even if I loved what I did, if I could go somewhere else that I didn't like as much and make more, that's what I would do. And so I think it's really important that we look at paying people that we rely on so much, what they deserve to be paid. So if that's possible, I would really like to see how we could potentially move that up a little sooner. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Howell?
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for the presentation. I have to say that was one of the most interesting surveys I've ever seen in my life. I took the survey, and you're essentially trying to say which is more important, and there's a lot of repeat questions in there that reordered some things, and it was such an interesting survey. I decided to go and take some snips of those questions because I've never seen anything like that before. So again, I was perplexed as an employee of Sedgwick County trying to figure out how to answer these questions, because you're putting values against each other that are both highly valued, and it's almost forcing us to pick, you know, something that's maybe very marginally different in our mind, but they're both very, very important. And I don't know that I like the way that study was done. It was very different than I've ever seen before. So I'll just preface the rest of my comments based on the fact that was, I guess, unexpected, and I'm not sure what to do with it. But I'll tell you, one of the narratives we hear a lot is that, people in government don't get raises, and they've not gotten a raise in years and years and years. And let me just start out by saying to our employees that I'm sure are going to be watching this, I value each and every one of you, and I appreciate what you do. You provide a very important service to Sedgwick County, our residents, and we need you very much, and I want them to stay and get better with their skill set as it continues to improve, and we provide better and better services to our community. It's extremely important that we retain our employees. I would rather retain employees than recruit employees. I mean, nothing wrong with recruiting employees, but I would much rather keep what we have and make them as good as possible. And there's two ways to move up in salary. One of those is to stay put and receive these 2.5% raises each and every year, or some years, and maybe not in some years. The other way, of course, is to improve your skill set and apply for more technical and more high-paying positions in the county. And I think we should make sure we encourage every one of our employees to always look at opportunities for transfers up the career ladder, because that's our these are people that we know who they are, we know their work ethic, and if they can take on more responsibility and move up a grade level because they're taking on more responsibility, they will jump ahead where they would have been if they just stayed put. So there's two ways to improve your salary, and that would be simply, doing these 2.5%, roughly 2.5% raises, or, jumping up that ladder. And that's what I would rather see them do is continue to do improvement in their, what they can provide to Sedgwick County, so that they would not be stagnant in their position. And I think we really should encourage that as much as possible. I did some quick calculations on the compounding. Again, if you were absolutely average in every one of these pay adjustments, again, because it's a pay pool, there's not really, I understand there's people who are going to receive 2.5%, some people might receive a little bit more or a little bit less. But if you were absolutely average, you would have seen about a 20.6% increase over the last 9 years. So that's what that comes out to. That's compounded increases. If you received each of those raises on it, on the average that was given to those pay pools, you would have a 20.6% increase. I don't know how that compares with the cost of living. I haven't done that calculation yet, but I plan to do that. I'm a little concerned that someone who's doing a good job, they're not really climbing up the career ladder. They're basically just staying level with the economy, and that maybe in some cases, maybe not even keeping up with the economy. So I think that obviously some type of pay increase this year is imperative, especially in light of the fact we didn't have one in 21. This is a correction that must be made. But the way we're doing this, I think, again, it's targeted, it's surgical. We're shifting the money from those that are at market or above market. We're shifting potential raises that they might get over to people who are below market. So we're doing this in a different way this year. I do anticipate some pretty unhappy employees, because I think that some people are going to feel like they were, they didn't get what they deserve. I'm very concerned about that. I would love it if we would take a position that says that a department that's been funded at a certain level and maybe has had a certain growth over the last number of years, if they would find efficiencies in that department, that those employees would be able to share, if you will, their savings, as long as they continue to provide the metrics and the performance measures. In other words, I don't want to see a disservicing in any way to the people that we serve, but that money's in that department. If there seems to be a desire to add FTEs. Again, if the workload's going up and you need more employees, then that makes sense. But if there's a way to drive efficiencies, I would rather see those funds, stay in the department and be enjoyed and shared by the employees in that department. I think there's another way to look at this. And that ought to be efficiency driven. I think we're missing a component of our pay plan by not, incentivizing efficiency, which again is also tied to improving services or maintaining the good services we provide, and not seeing that go down in any way. But if you have less employees that are providing more services, they should be rewarded for that. And then I'll just say, I've said this numerous years, I'll say it again. I think this is an appropriate time to say it again. I think we are not keeping up with the private sector in terms of our benefits program. the entire private sector largely has moved over to personal time off policies, moving away from vacation and sick leave policies. They tend to provide, again, in lieu of a gigantic sick leave account, which we're all comfortable with, another way to do that is to have short-term and long-term disability insurance that would be provided by the employer. It's relatively inexpensive. It should be a benefit that we give to our employees, so they don't need to worry about if they get sick for 6 months or for 20 years, what's going to happen. They will have an income that will take care of that employee. That's something I think is lacking. I'll say again, our Capers 3 is a disaster. I know that it requires legislation, and we in my opinion, is we need to get this on a legislative platform, because Capers 3 is a wet blanket. We cannot keep up with the private sector on our retirement. If you're a legacy employee, you have Capers 1 and 2, you don't know what I'm talking about. But for any new employees that's been here since 2013 and beyond, Capers 3 is not competitive. And I think we can do much, much better with a employer matching program on a 457 plan that gives that employee immediate day one vesting, if you want to think of it that way, and total control of their retirement account. That would be much more competitive with the private market, and we're not competitive in that regard. So I have a question for Misty at this point. This is a very good, you talked about on your comparison with these other 3 cities. You compared wage data from Wichita to 3 comparative communities. But you did not say whether or not you compare the benefits packages in terms of the value of those benefit packages as a total compensation comparison.
No, this is just on salary compensation.
I guess, again, I think it's good data, but I think it would have been better if we could have looked at the value of the benefits package, because I think, again, Sedgwick County does have good benefits. I think we're lacking in some areas that we could improve. But I do think that to look at only wages is missing kind of a point, because I think everybody out there is looking at ways to improve benefits, and retirement is such a huge part of an employee's career. If we're not looking at the total package, I think we're missing the point. So just, I guess my personal opinion is, I think it's good data, but it's not going quite far enough. Thank you for that answer. I also have a question. Do these pay adjustments include our row offices, treasurer, deeds, and clerk, and other elected office positions?
So it includes their offices, but not the elected official themselves.
Correct. Okay, that's good. What about folks in the sheriff's, DA, those areas as well, election office, all that's included?
They are not included. Again, those are the departments we need a lot of clarification on. Those would include fire, DA, certain sheriff, contract employees, part-time and temporary are not included in there. Again, that's the clarification we are waiting on. So.
All right. Thank you for that clarification. I have maybe one other comment here, and that would be to the Commissioner Dennis's comment, his first comment regarding if you chose to leave Sedgwick County, what would be your main reason for leaving? I think it's imperative that we do this, in my opinion, a different way. And I'm going to ask for us to do this. I've said it before, and I'm asking this formally, please hear me. I think we need to reach out to our former employees, going back a couple year or two. We have their address of record. Anybody that's left Sedgwick County in the last couple of years, we should reach out to them with a request for them to answer some questions for our own benefit. Why did you leave? Did you take another position somewhere else? What were your reasons for leaving? Maybe we could ask some questions. They could maybe weight their answer, but I would also give them an opportunity to actually, editorialize and give us, if you will, they're in their own words, an explanation as to why they left, if they'd like to leave further comments. The fact of the matter is, this pie chart is theoretical, and everybody wants more money. There's no question. That's a very common human character trait. Everyone would like to be paid more. But the question is, if they've actually left, they've crossed that threshold, why did they leave? And I think there's a lot of things we don't know about that, and we are not really asking the questions to ever know. So as this is presented today, it's theoretical. We don't know. And again, I want to just tell our employees, I love what they provide. I value them. I want to see them get these raises. I think they deserve it. But I think we're lacking information to to take this information and put too much weight on this, because it's not really based in what's really going on. It's based on theory. So thanks for the presentation today. You're welcome to make other comments, but I'm done making my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Cruz?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for being here today and presenting this report. This is a lot of really great information, and I won't belabor any points that have already been made, so I'll just make a couple of different ones. Our workforce is changing, and so how are we handling different generations that are coming to work for us? We can see through a lot of data, I'm sure that Misty probably knows some of this or has seen it in her research, that people don't really stay at positions for 20, 30 years like in years past. So how are we attracting those folks who are of the younger generation coming to work for us when maybe pay is the only thing they're thinking about? When I first started in the workforce, I never really thought about retirement just because it wasn't in my forefront, right? It wasn't something that I was approaching very fast. So that's something I guess I think I'd like to really be thinking about, is how are a different generation of folks coming into our workforce and what is attractive to them. And I would have to say that pay starting out when you're getting a job is, when you're raising families, a lot of single parents out there doing it on their own, unfortunately, that's really important. So I have to say that while I would like to hear what employees that have worked for us before, why they left, I wonder how their views have changed. I wonder, a lot of different things that go into surveys. I do think that it's important, so I would be in agreement with that. The other thing is, and this is just the last point, is, we've been talking about rainy days, right? It's been pouring for a very long time here in Sedgwick County. And I wonder, what does it cost us to train folks repeatedly? What are those costs, and how does that measure up to, if we were to just pay people more, what would be the difference? Instead of retraining, and a couple of commissioners have made this point, but to reiterate it, that's very important. High turnovers, we have to retrain people. That costs a lot of money. So not to mention the recruitment efforts that are made when people leave and we need to fill those positions. And then finally, when we're talking about different positions and the workload that they do, the type of safety that they have to go through. I mean, working in the jail is different than, working in our law department. And no disrespect to anybody who works for us, because all of these positions are important. But when I sit down with a paramedic and she tells me that she has to decompress for 20 minutes in her driveway before she goes in to cook dinner for her family at night, because she's just rolled up on a car wreck where someone has passed away. Those are pretty intense situations. And so how do we adjust our pay for that? And I know that that's written in here, but it's so important, I think, to understand the work that we do, that is done by the folks who work, the public servants who work for Sedgwick County. There's a lot of differences in what they do. So taking that into consideration. But if we talk about rainy day funds, I look at Lindsay over here, like, you're very conservative, I get it. But now is the time that it's pouring, and we need to, I guess, for rain analogy, put up the umbrella, right? I mean, let's figure out ways to think outside the box to help these folks stay in these positions, because I know that people love what they do. They want to stay. They want to work and be public servants, but at the end of the day, they have to provide for their due. I think the charts are very important for us to visually see kind of what's happening. But those are my comments. Thank you for being here and showing this to us.
Okay, I don't see any other comments. It feels that maybe you should take some more steps and.
Yeah, so again, we're just, we will be waiting on that information about job families, and we will be coming back and giving you an update on that information, giving you, again, the full picture of the grade recommendations.
Okay. Tom?
Commissioners, While you were discussing, Lindsay had gone and gotten the long sheet for me to answer Commissioner Howell's question on the national CPI. And since from 2008 to 2020, the national CPI has gone up 22.4%. The average wage of a county employee has gone up 17.8%. That's from 2008 to 2020. So we've not kept up with CPI, is that pretty much it? And then lastly, I want to commend this commission for even allowing us to do this analysis. We have been in government a long time, and there are many times that the elected officials do not want to know the answers to these questions. And this commission allowing us to do this compensation market analysis is a breath of fresh air, honestly, to at least let us look into this. So thank you for that. I've got several notes written down. This was a compensation discussion. We'll have others. But there are a number of ways to make a place a good place to work. Environment is a part of that. Their ability, the supervisory relationship is important. Even on the survey that IMA did, when 11% say that they have they would or they possibly could leave because of supervisory relationship, that's significant. We have some training programs going for our supervisors. I think we need to have a discussion about a 360 survey or 360 evaluation on supervisors. I've done that in other components of organizations, and it's effective and gives supervisors feedback on how they're being seen as relating to their subordinates. So that's something we can take a look at. Their environment of where they park, their physical environment of where they work, those are all important things that we need to take a look at to make Sedgwick County a better place to work. Their training and job growth, their ability to let them go to training, the ability to give them time away from their main tasks to self-improve and train is important. I'm going to reach out to IMA to see if they would do an exit polling phone survey with all employees that have left. I think that's something we should at least explore. I just don't have the staff on hand. It's going to be time on task to go through that. And I think to some degree, if we have an external entity do that, it might be more valid regarding results we could get. So we will look into that. I know we have a cost of turnover analysis done. We'll refresh that and get that back to you. It's significant. When you lose an employee and have to go hire, onboard, start over, and train, there's significant cost that it's fairly shocking, but we'll refresh that as well. We have a PTO analysis ongoing currently with the leadership team. We'll continue to look at that. And I do agree with Commissioner Howell, the Capers 3, that's a legislative issue that we're going to have to probably bring up. I'll refresh you on that next October, November, when we talk about legislative platform that would require legislative change, but we can talk about it at that time. So I think that's my summary. Tried to summarize these workshops and go out and produce meaningful results. Even on the appraisers issue, Mark has been given a challenge of 21 suggestions from the auditor. I think it's important that we go and look at every one of those 21s. Some cost money, some do not. And we should go in and analyze, and Mark and the leadership team will talk about what we can implement and what we cannot. So I think that when we have these sessions and we hear this kind of conversation, it's incumbent upon us to go back and create action, and that's what we'll intend to do. So thank you very much for your time this morning, and we'll talk again about this very topic. So.
Okay. I don't see any other comments, so thanks again for you and WSU and the staff for all the work you've done. So with that, we will adjourn the staff meeting, and we will see everybody tomorrow. Thank you.